be like Nigeria, where in 2016 they recorded stagnation because oil prices tumbled, and that is not good for an economy. So I'll then move swiftly to the key areas. So first, the fiscal sector. The overall fiscal target for 2019 was a primary surplus of 0.1% of GDP and an overall deficit of 4.5% of GDP, as I mentioned. The outturn for the period from January to September was about 0.3%, that's the deficit, and 4.5% deficit for primary and overall balance, respectively. Indeed, the target for the overall deficit for the period ending 2019 was 4.1% of GDP, suggesting that a worsening of the fiscal position had been recorded. But the target was 4.91%, and we recorded 4.5%. This provisional outcome suggests that the overall deficit target for 2019 will not be attained. The 2019 target will be difficult to meet, even though we still expect the target of 5% of GDP as prescribed by the Fiscal Responsibility Act. The worsening fiscal outcomes in 2019 is largely on account of shortfall in revenue targets. Revenue to GDP ratio was 10.5%, extremely low, compared to a target of 12.1% for the period ending September 2019. Indeed, this was lower than the 11% recorded for the same period in 2018. So you see our revenue situation worsening since 2018. This in turn is driven by a shortfall in non-oil tax revenue. The lower than expected revenue realized has been associated with a lower than programmed government spending. Government expenditure ratio as of September 2019 was 15%, as opposed to 16.2%. So you see a cut in spending to match the revenue, cut your coat according to your size. Unfortunately, and I think I saw a cartoon where ISSER was with a tape measure trying to measure the president to cut his coat according to his size. Some very, I don't know how these media people do their own thing. I think it was Dr. Aka who was doing the measurement. So we have revenue underperformance compromising fiscal and growth prospects of the economy, because every time there's a cut, it is a capital expenditure component that is cut, and we'll see that shortly. The overall deficit is projected to be 4.7% in 2020, with primary surplus of 0.7%. This will be on account of relatively higher growth in revenue related to expenditure. Should this revenue and expenditure targets be met, the fiscal outcome will indeed be commendable. Now, there are a few things I need to highlight under the fiscal. One is, you realize in 2020, the projection is that wages and salaries and interest payments would account for 27.12% and 25.9% of total spending. So if we are going to spend 25.9% on interest payment, not on the capital, not on the principal. After the principal, we are keeping it for posterity. When they come, they will pay. But we pay very little of it. But the interest component, 25.9% of total spending goes into that. And then when you add 27.12% as wages and salaries, we are left with very little to do other things in terms of development. There is no doubt that tax exemptions, higher interest payments, and revenue shortfalls will continue to pose challenges in 2020, thereby affecting capital spending and stifling growth. The fiscal deficit target of 4.7% of GDP is unlikely to be achieved. It is unlikely to be achieved. And I add that it is economically prudent target. It's an economically prudent target, but politically unappealing in an election year. In an election year, if you achieve 4.7% of GDP, prudent, smart. But in an election year, that would be unappealing, because There were a lot of wage demands. There were a lot of demand for roads. And I believe you see this. No road, no vote. No electricity, no vote. No water, no vote. I mean, all these demands, these pressures will come. And if you were in the seat and there is a strong opposition and you want to achieve a 4.7% fiscal deficit, that is why we say it is politically unappealing, and we think there is likely to be a deviation from this target. In terms of let me now move on to the monetary sector. The target is to ensure price stability within an end of period inflation, with an end of period inflation of 8%. Gross international reserves for 3.5% of import cover. Core inflation, which was 6.3% in September 2019. We expect a forecast of 8% inflation in 2020, and which is close to the medium-term target of 8 plus or minus 2%, barring any unforeseen shocks. But can this be achieved in an election year? I think we leave ourselves with that question, whether we can achieve an inflation rate of 8% in an election year, a single-digit inflation in an election year, because we all know the pressures that will come. Everybody would ask for market premium, the cleaner, everybody wants market premium. Yeah. And then money supply was slower in 2019, and it's likely to also decline in 2020. The Ghana reference rate, which serves as the base, remained flat in 2019 and less likely to decline by a significant margin in 2020. The exchange rate cumulatively to the dollar cumulatively was 9.22% as of September 2019, and likely to depreciate much higher in the first quarter of 2020, because that's when companies repatriate their profits. That is when we pay for some of the Christmas shopping. So between now and the first quarter, you see some movement in the exchange rate, and if we don't have enough reserves, it can be very troubling, particularly for the private sector. The GSE Composite Index declined in 2019, but we are told that there are prospects for 2020 in view of expected improvement in financial sector uncertainties. Now the cleanup has been completed, so we're likely to see improvement in on the Ghana Stock Exchange. In 2020, favorable global financing conditions are expected, while domestic credit is expected to be strong. The recapitalization exercise would continue to promote sound financial indicators, with expected expansion in mobile money and credit without increasing interest rates. Expected developments in the real sector would also propel growth in net domestic assets and net foreign assets. Financial sector growth has been minimal, as I mentioned earlier, it's about 1.8%. However, total deposits increase while capital adequacy ratios remain high. Reforms of special deposit institutions, the introduction of deposit protection insurance in December 2019, in addition to effective regulation, including good corporate governance structures, would ensure a more stable financial sector. Ladies and gentlemen, in 2020, outlook risk of government crowding out the private sector and excessive pressure on the interest rate has been noted, because government is borrowing quite a lot from the domestic system, and that will crowd out the private sector. Also, increasing debt stock and debt sustainability remains of great concern. Concerns about taxing mobile money remains and can affect financial deepening, especially the poor who have no access to formal banking services, especially with the collapse of microfinance and other non-bank financial institutions. There are many people who feel very intimidated to even enter the banks, and mobile money is convenient, very useful. So if we want to zoom in and tax, we ought to be very careful the way we approach it. It will be a gradual step, but if you are not careful in impose higher taxes, that can affect the mobile money sector. Ladies and gentlemen, in terms of the external sector, Ghana's trade with the rest of the world is growing, especially in recent times. However, this trade has mainly been driven by exploitation and export of primary products, mainly natural resources. Primary commodities have continued to dominate Ghana's export, and export destinations are still concentrated largely in industrial countries, including the EU. If you look at the top 10 import sources, you will find China. But if you pick our top 10 export destinations, you might not find China. So it looks like we are still bent on the traditional areas, exporting in raw forms, and we need to diversify. Can I have a bottle of water, please? Ghana is less likely to gain from trade as development impact of exporting is crucially dependent on prices and income elasticity of demand, both of which are low for primary commodities. Moreover, the dependence on primary commodities subjects exports to the vagaries of the volatile world market, exposing those countries dependent on a narrow range of primary commodities to serious balance of payment problems, especially if these commodities face declining terms of trade. So far, trade has not had the desired effects on employment, income, and human development. It has not translated into sufficient, decent jobs. There is an urgent need to diversify Ghana's economy towards higher productivity activities in manufacturing. Industrial output and manufactured exports still account for negligible shares of total output and exports. The challenge facing Ghana, as with many African countries, is to transform the economy from a resource-dependent one to a dynamic, diversified industrial economy. We also speak about public debt because it is of great concern to you and I. It is how much our future has been mortgaged, and we need to be concerned about debt. As at end 2019, the nominal public debt stood at 205.56 billion, that is 60.55% of GDP. It comprises external and domestic debt of 107.16 and billion cedis, and then $20.15 billion respectively. Comprising external and domestic debt of 107.16 billion cedis, that is in dollar terms $20.15 billion, and 101.40 billion cedis respectively, that is the internal and external debt. The rate of debt accumulation as at end 2019 was 20.51% and 14.33%, excluding the financial sector bailout. We know that this pendant to resort to external borrowing poses macroeconomic risks as the debt burden continues to escalate. Continuing currency depreciation could lead to a rapid increase in the value of foreign currency denominated debt and its concomitant interest payments beyond sustainable levels. Last week I was in Nairobi, and I was speaking with the World Bank economist, and he said Ghana has done so well. Our debt GDP ratio has come down. So he was wondering how Ghana did it, because they have to learn. He wants to recommend to the Kenyan government to follow Ghana's example. I told him it was because of rebasing. Then he was shocked. He laughed. I said, yes, we rebased. GDP was rebased. That's how come our debt has gone down. I think Ghana, Kenya, we are around the same level, 60 point something percent. So we haven't done any magic. It is mainly rebasing. The simple policy conclusion is that if Ghana wishes to grow faster, it must first mobilize more domestic resources and put an eyes on its appetite for borrowing. We further argue that it is not just the size of the debt that matters, but what kind of spending we do with the borrowed money. We should rather be asking about the cost and benefit of the government expenditures on different items at different times. Resource misallocation and inefficiencies in government spending are significant sources of distortions in the Ghanaian economy. But we are told that we are within our sustainability threshold because Ghana is a medium performer and our threshold will be 65%. So if we are at 60.55%, we are safe. So don't be surprised if by 2020 we are at 65 because there is room for improvement. Now let me move to agriculture. Agric grew by 2.6% during the first half of 2019. Quite a huge deviation from the target of 6.2% during the same period last year. Additionally, the 2019 half-year agricultural sector growth rate was 2.1 percentage points lower than the rate during the same period in 2018. Given that Ghana's agricultural calendar has not changed dramatically over the period, it is therefore surprising that the sector is projected to end the year with 6.9% growth rate. We are growing at 2.1 or 2 point something, and we are projecting to grow at 6.9. We are in a half, at the moment, we have a few months to go. Do you think we'll get there? I don't know how there will be that quantum leap. It is therefore important that the basis for the 6.9 projection is relooked, and then economic policy statement provide cogent reasons for such projections, which will provide realistic projections, because as far as agric is concerned, we are way off the projection. The performance of the agricultural sector is expected to rest mainly on modernization initiative being implemented during the Planting for Food and Jobs program. In order to put the review of the sector component of the budget statement and economic policy of government for 2020 in a proper perspective, it is important to ask what the main challenges and opportunities are in Ghana's agricultural sector, and whether the proposed budget and economic policy sufficiently addresses them. The challenges relate to three broad areas of productivity, profitability, and sustainability. The main opportunity is the availability of arable land. The budget seeks to address the issue of low productivity, which stems from low levels of agricultural modernization. Through the Planting for Food and Jobs initiative, through the Planting for Food and Jobs initiative, the main strategy is the use of subsidies, and I think that is something we need to look at. While the use of subsidies for boosting productivity in African and Ghanaian agriculture is not new, it is important not to lose sight of its potential distortionary effects. Also, the subsidy strategy tends to be unsustainable if the fundamental issue of poor investment incentive is not addressed. Why do I say that? We provide subsidies farmers produce. They want good returns on their investments. But if there's no market, there's no storage, what do you expect? There will be the disincentive to invest the next time. And that's what we are seeing with rice. A lot of rice being exposed to the vagaries of the weather. I would have thought that we shouldn't be saying we are now constructing or we are in the process of completing storage facilities. Everything should have happened at the same time. Otherwise, every rational farmer would cut back on investment. Some borrow to invest and they can't get their monies back. That will be a major challenge. So I think we shouldn't just focus on fertilizer and other inputs, but also look at the other things that happen, the value chain process, and ensure that they are all addressed. The other challenge I mentioned, the third one, is the sustainability of production system. It is much less focused in the 2020 budget and economic policy statement. It is important to adapt production systems that are environmentally friendly. Such systems should be directly incorporated into the various components of the Planting for Food and Jobs program. Example is to use biotechnologies to enhance production technologies or production outcomes. Finally, in the agricultural sector, I would add that it is an era of Ghana beyond aid. In an era of Ghana beyond aid, we note that the agricultural sector is still heavily dependent on the magnanimity of donors. Why do we say that? In 2019, at least 55% of allocations to MOFA and fisheries and aquaculture development were expected to come from donors. 55%. If you are married and 55% of your income is to come from your father-in-law or mother-in-law, you can imagine how you run your home effectively with that. So I think the share of donor funding is expected to be less in 2020, but still high. Approximately, it's about 40% share of donor funding to agriculture. That is still very high, and I think that is not a good signal. Whether the reduction in the share of donor allocation to the agricultural sector is a sign of a Ghana beyond aid or not will be seen in subsequent budgets. Now I turn to industry. Growth in Ghana's industrial sector has mainly been driven by the mining and quarrying subsector, of which oil production has become an important component. The industrial sector has performed poorly in years in which the minerals and oil sector does not perform well, and vice versa. So when minerals and oil sector performs well, industry performs well. If they don't, industry doesn't. It should rather be manufacturing that should be driving this sector, not minerals and oil, because the job absorption effects of the growth in these sectors are not significant. They are not very labor intensive. The medium-term projections in the 2020 budget indicate that industrial sector's growth will continue to be largely dependent on minerals and oil production. Industry is expected to grow by 8.6% in 2020, but growth will dip to 3.3% in 2021. Why that is the case, I don't know, and further to 2.3% in 2022. This projected trend is mainly informed by expected sharp decline in oil production from existing oil fields. So again, you see the challenge. If you depend on oil, over-depend on oil and gas, when there's a decline in output within this, is likely to affect the industrial sector as a whole. The implication is that government's key policies or programs for the industrial sector, particularly the 1D1F, aimed at revitalizing manufacturing sector, may not be able to produce results that could offset shocks to the mining and quarrying sector, at least not in the short to medium term. So, while the 1D1F program generally appears laudable, it seems the 2020 budget presents no clear policy direction on how to address or cope with the dependence on the minerals and oil sector in the short to medium term. Still on 1D1F, the 2020 budget indicates that there are about 150 districts for which no private business operator has shown interest in, and that government is committed to identifying and supporting private investors for these districts. If no private investor has shown interest in some of the districts, then it appears that the perceived return on private investment in these districts may be considerably low among potential investors, despite a host of incentives in the form of tax holidays, exemptions from imports, duties, etc., offered by the government. In other words, the economic viability of establishing factories in some of these districts may be very low, begging the question of whether every district should have a medium to large scale factory, as being perused under the 1D1F program. So should it be 1D1F, one district, one factory? If some districts are not appealing to investors, perhaps we may have to take another look. If some districts could have two and others could move to. So perhaps it is time to revisit the ambition and focus policy attention on projects that show significant long-term viability than to have many projects, of which many may not hold limited long-term commercial potential. I move to the last subsector, and that is services. The services sector occupies a largest share in the Ghanaian economy, with a normal GDP share of 46.3% at the year end of 2018. In the first half of 2019, the sector recorded an average growth of 6.9%, compared with 0.9% recorded in the same period for the preceding year of 2018. The sector recorded an increase in growth from 1.4% and 0.5% in the first and second quarters of 2018, respectively, to 7.2% and 6.5% for the same period in 2019. And with a projected end-of-year growth rate of 5.4%, that is for 2020. Sorry, for 2020, a target of 7.3% is expected. The financial and insurance activities subsector saw a rebound of positive growth of 1.8%, as I mentioned earlier, in the first half of 2019, compared to the recent declining growth rates in 2017 and 2018. However, the financial intermediation subsector is expected to record the lowest growth in 2020 at 1.1%. So the woes are still not over, but at least some positive growth is expected. The main drivers of this is the Bank of Ghana and the Securities and Exchange Commission's exercise to clean up the financial sector. In spite of this, the services sector is projected to remain the dominant sector in 2020, of 46.2% of total sectorial value added in national output, with an expected corresponding growth rate of 5.8%, an average growth of 6.3% over the medium term, that is 2020 to 2023. Some of the key components, key development in the sector and its impact on the private sector and job creation are highlighted. In terms of education, the much touted free SHS is expected to have increased enrollment by 43% between 2016 and 2018. The education sector is expected to grow from 3.9% in 2018 to 4.5% in 2019, with an average growth of 5.7% over the medium term. However, it is not clear how much funding has been set aside to build the required infrastructure and employ the requisite number of lecturers in preparation for the huge number of SHS graduates who will be entering the university in the next 2 to 3 years. What is the plan to employ the SHS graduates who will not gain admission to the tertiary cycle? I think these are questions we all need to ask. I move around, I don't see a lot of infrastructure development. So I don't know how we are going to accommodate the free SHS graduates who will be coming in 2020. So those are the questions that we keep asking. We know some hostels will be constructed, Commonwealth Hall and others, so that's a good signal. But as to lecture halls, and whether that will even be adequate as to number of lecture halls, we need to tackle this so that we are sure that they get absorbed into the system without much hassle. Then to transportation services sector. Transport and storage subsector is expected to bounce back from 1.1% growth in 2018 to 3.7% in 2019. Then in 2020, 5.1%. The focus on construction in the 2020 budget has implications for the private sector, as it provides an avenue to improve the road networks, reduce the cost of doing business, and create jobs. And I think we need to take a critical look at the Afrobarometer report that came. When they ranked, it was infrastructure, roads topped the list. That is what Ghanaians want. And I think sometimes politicians play with research findings. Some years back, the Afrobarometer report came with some clear things that Ghanaians were unhappy about. I don't think the government of the day took it serious, and they lost power because of that. I think we should take research findings very, very seriously. If roads is what people want, I think we need to give them roads if we seriously want to win their votes. So I would urge our government to take research seriously, invest in research, and also take research findings very, very seriously. The current politicization of road infrastructure, no road, no vote, is worrying as we move into the election year. Indeed, government has described the year 2020 as the year of roads. It is indeed worrying because if we are not careful, we will run huge budget deficits. We want to win votes. Government provide roads. We make, of course, it's a legitimate right to demand for roads, but we also have to be a bit circumspect in doing so. Otherwise, we'll have the political business cycle again, where we overspend in election year, then we clean up, then we do it the same, as if we don't learn. ICT, Information, Communication and Technology, the aims of the 2020 budget is the digitization of the Ghanaian economy, which will ensure that the economy is formalized by leveraging on technology. The ICT subsector, however, is expected to grow, but at a slower pace than in the previous years. The sector is expected to grow by 5.9% in 2020, with an average growth rate of 5.3% over the medium term. There are a lot of programs, digital property addressing system, paperless port system, driver's licenses, NHIS, and many, many others that are expected to be undertaken. But one would ask, has the sector transformed the job market? How much has the government leveraged this sector to create employment for the youth? Are Ghanaians equipped to take advantage of these technological changes and shifts? Because some are tech savvy, others are not. Now, tourism, the last component. The government seeks to leverage on tourism sector to create additional sources of domestic revenue mobilization. The hotels and restaurant subsector is therefore projected to grow at 4.7% in 2020 from 3.2% in 2018, with an average growth rate of 5.5% over the medium term. Some of the interventions include Eat Ghana, Eat Chocolate in February, and Wear Ghana Month in March. Are these interventions enough to create jobs for the private sector? How many Ghanaian entrepreneurs are involved in these initiatives? How much of our cocoa is being processed? Can we encourage Ghanaians to eat Ghana rice, for example, as part of the tourism initiative, so that the rice farmers in Ghana can have ready markets? I hear some rice importers have started withdrawing their sponsorship to certain media houses. But that is good for Ghana. It tells you that if we should conscientize ourselves and eat made in Ghana or enjoy made in Ghana products, if we know that we are creating jobs, of course, the producers should also ensure certain level of quality so that we can also enjoy local products. There's national pride in using your own products than importing from elsewhere. You don't know what it contains. Certain countries produce items for exports. They are marked for export only. Why for export only? They know why. So let's try and eat a lot of what we produce so that we create the jobs for ourselves. In 2020, government intends to commence operations of the Hotel Catering and Tourism Training Institute, HOTCAT, a professional hospitality and catering skills training sector in the country. So hopefully that would enhance quality within our hotels. But the cost is still on the high side. If you look at how much we pay per room, the hotel rates compared to other places, it is just too expensive, and we need to tackle this problem. The vision is quite clear but the bane of our development has always been with the implementation of our policies. The services sector has the potential to boost our resources and diversify our economy. For that, the roadmap remains unclear. So, ladies and gentlemen, let me conclude. The budget is a very heavy document, but I will try to bring out some of the key highlights, and then also conclude with some of the key highlights or key findings. So I want to project the key highlights as well. GDP growth projections and outcomes for the past 3 years are encouraging, especially the non-oil growth. The drive to ensure diversification of the economy should be sustained to avoid over-reliance on oil and gas. Ladies and gentlemen, wages and salaries and interest payments account for 27.12 and 25.9% in 2020, in the 2020 budget, respectively, thereby limiting the fiscal space for capital spending. If you look at the amount allocated to capital spending, it's quite on the low side. As the expectation is that we'll go and borrow and finance more of this, and again, we know the repercussions of that. There is no doubt that tax exemptions, high interest payments, and revenue shortfalls will continue to pose challenges, thereby affecting capital spending and stifling growth. Tax exemptions, we don't have the current figure. I only saw that of international trade tax exemptions. It's about a third. A third of that component, international trade tax, goes into tax exemptions. Some are good. I mean, if there's a hospital that has to be hospital equipment or other things, they need to be exempted from some of this tax at the ports. So that for me is good. But I think we need to rationalize it. We need to go into that and see whether some of them are really necessary. I have seen some companies enjoy tax holidays, and I question whether it's value for money. Why should they enjoy these tax holidays? And I think there are quite a number of such companies around. Tax exemptions amounted to 2.4 billion in 2018. If you multiply by the exchange rate of 5.2 or 5.4, that is close to 13 to 14 billion Ghana cedis gone into tax exemptions. Ask yourself, how much did we raise from taxes to allow such a huge amount to go? If we are able to save 50% or even 40% of this amount, and we don't have to borrow, that will free us from interest payments and the like. And I think that is where the argument should go. You don't give out too much freebies and then you turn to the market and go and borrow. That doesn't make rational economic sense. The fiscal deficit target of 4.7% of GDP is unlikely to be achieved. However, because we have a law, I believe government will try to respect the law, so it will inch closely to the 5%. It is an economically prudent target. It makes economic sense. But sometimes when you bring in the political economy, the dynamics change. No road, no vote, then it changes. But politically, it is unappealing in an election year. In 2020, outlook risks of government crowding out the private sector and excessive pressure on interest rate has been noted. Also, increasing debt stock and debt sustainability remains of great concern. We also note that concerns about taxing mobile money remains and can affect financial deepening, especially the poor who have no access to formal banking services, and also with the collapse of microfinance and other non-bank financial institutions. The poor normally accesses financial services through microfinance and the like. A majority of them have been collapsed, and the one that they can cling onto, mobile money services, if we try taxing them, quite a number would pull out of that sector. So we ought to be very careful with that. Then we also note about debt. As of September, stood at 60.55% of GDP, but within the 65% DSA threshold. But interest payments remain very high. I think I've mentioned this. It has severe implications on the fiscal space and the exchange rate. It is not clear what the basis of projecting 6.9 growth rate in agriculture, especially if you look at our growth history in agriculture. And I think we ought to look at that in subsequent projections. Third, why we use subsidies for boosting agriculture in African and Ghanaian agriculture, why that is not boosting productivity in African and Ghanaian agriculture is not new. It is important not to lose sight of its distortionary effects. Also, the subsidy strategy tends to be unsustainable if the fundamental issue of poor investment incentive is not addressed. I think I mentioned this earlier. Again, the 1D, 1F program, I think is laudable. If we have a decent factory in every district, it will minimize the rural-urban migration, it will create jobs, there will be forward and backward linkages between agriculture and industry. So that's a good idea. In the 2020 budget, we don't see any clear policy direction on how to address or cope with the dependence on the minerals and oil sector in the short to medium term. We're also not sure how much funding has been set aside to build the required infrastructure and employ the requisite number of lecturers in preparation for the huge number of SHS graduates who will be entering the universities in the next 2 to 3 years. What is the plan to employ those who drop out as well? I think that's something we need to be discussing. Lastly, job creation. There are a lot of, if you read the budget, a lot of job creation here and there, not very, actually coordinated. We see NAPCO over 90-something thousand jobs, say 100,000, but close to 100,000 jobs. Then you find youth in afforestation, you find youth in employment, 91,420 jobs, and many, many, many others. But the question is, these are short-term jobs. People get into that for 2-3 years. What is the exit strategy? Yes, they are pastors, but what is the exit strategy? I am a bit excited about some of these programs. For instance, NAPCO, for instance. Oftentimes when our graduates move out, employers require work experience. You cannot pay for work experience. You need to acquire that experience. Our students go out with letters trying to get job placement and they don't easily get it. So if NAPCO is providing that platform, for me, it is good. However, my issue with NAPCO is whether we are getting value for money. 700 cedis per NAPCO trainee, if you multiply by 100,000 times 12, it's billions of cedis, over 8 billion cedis a year. In our economic balance, we say your wage rate should be equal to your marginal productivity. Are we deriving enough output from them? Are the benefits good enough to warrant how much we spend on NAPCO? That is one thing. Then, of course, with all of these jobs that are being created, is it enough? Is it going to, over the next 3 to 5 years or 10 years, ease the unemployment, youth unemployment challenges that we face? I think that's, for me, very critical. Then, lastly, we were told that over 12.4 billion cedis have been put in the pockets of Ghanaians. I believe we all have had your share of the 12.4 billion cedis. But the question, but the trickle-down effect depends on where you find yourself. We are told free SHS. If you have a son or daughter or children in secondary school, part of this money would have trickled down to your pocket. But if you don't, then you won't benefit. If you are a nursing trainee, some of this money will go into your pocket. But if you are not, you won't find that, and so on and so forth. However, during the same period, we also saw utility price increases. We also saw communication service tax increased, and many others. And the net effect, has it eroded the gains? I think that's the kind of discussion we should be asking, whether with all these monies that have been put in our pockets, we haven't found another way to take it out of our pockets. I think that's the question we throw to ourselves. So on that note, let me thank colleagues at ISSER, the senior members of ISSER, for it's not a one-man show. It is something we all collectively prepared. To all the senior colleagues here, Dr. Charles Aka, Andrew, what is Atta? Atta, yeah, yes. It's small, but very powerful. Atta, and we heard about what people term the Mahama roads. In 2016, there was a lot of infrastructure development, a lot of money is committed to infrastructure development. And I think that was a good thing because once you develop infrastructure, it has ripple effects on the private sector. Food prices, food can move from the rural areas to urban centers. You find it creates jobs, it opens up societies. So infrastructure is good. Now, my own personal take on this. You drive around, you see some of these roads in very good shape. Then you see some in a very bad state. Um, Actually, a greater proportion and a very bad state. So you then start to question, where are the roads? Um, for instance, I was then going to Eastern region and I drove through Ablekuma to join Ofanko Pokwasi. And that road, it looks good. I was very happy because years back, you couldn't use that road to avoid traffic. You have to go through Achimota before you come to, so I was very impressed. That road has not been fully completed. It's still under construction. I think they are still working on it. But one of the very good roads I can see. Then you drive through on the Kumasi roads or even central region. Uh, so the new roads, we saw a lot of construction. And I must say, Accra Kumasi Road, every year there's construction. Ever since I was in secondary school, I used to go to Brongahafo. Every now and then there's construction on that road. And I keep asking, why do we have to construct and reconstruct and reconstruct? Can't we construct one decent? Look, if we do just 10% every year, very good road that can last for 20 years, I'm sure Ghana would have been a better place. But I call them election roads. They just put something thinly on the road after elections, then we are back to square one. So that is where we find ourselves. There has been a lot of investment in roads, but the quality of the roads leaves much to be desired. And I think going forward, 2020, we don't want election roads. We want good roads, value for money, that we don't have to go back to construct those roads again. Both sides, NPP, NDC, that's what they've been doing. Election roads. After a year, it deteriorates. Then we're back to square one. We don't want election roads. Agric investment and output. Planting for food and jobs. There's a lot of fertilizer subsidy. 50% of the cost of the fertilizer is absorbed by government. There are other things. If you pick budget from not even from 2017, from time memorial, every budget I pick, there's a lot of money going to agriculture. Agri grows at a negative rate. Its output declines. And recently that we are seeing some positive growth in agriculture. Most years, agriculture doesn't grow. Growth is negative. So you tend to question that with all this money is going into, sometimes even tractors were bought for MPs. MPs acquired those tractors because I hear the farmers could not afford. So they can rent them out to the farmers and whatever. We've done all of this, yet agric is not growing. So that's my point, that we are investing so much into agriculture, but we are not getting the right output. Perhaps we don't look at the value chain. It's not just about input. It's also about storage. It's about marketing, about roads, and many, many others. That is why we see a lot of rice, a rice glut we see. Tomato, the same thing. People can't just sell. They produce, they can't sell, and the following year, they cut back on production because they have lost completely. So that's the argument I was making. The issue about the communication, the second question, communication service tax. I am not saying we shouldn't tax them. If ideally, the telcos, they make a lot of profit. If they would absorb any tax government imposes, bingo, that's fine. But it depends on how much you tax them. Recently, the increment, you saw what they did. They slapped it back to us. Just give it back to us. So if it is going to be that dialogue to ensure that, yes, we tax mobile money, but the amount of tax is not so huge. It's not passed on to the consumer. It can be absorbed by the telcos. That is fine. Otherwise, if it's passed on to us, like when you recharge, then you see that some percentage has been taken off, I mean, that would be a disincentive for you and I, especially the poor, to use mobile money services. At the moment, microfinance companies and all the financial services that the poor uses, a lot of them have gone down. So confidence in the banking system or in the financial sector is a problem. A lot of them now rely on mobile money, and you're going to impose tax. It's going to worsen financial deepening. So if I have to pay you, I'll drive to your office and come and pay you when I can transfer the money. It's going to increase traffic flow. It's going to, it has a lot of social ramifications, and we need to avoid some of this. Thank you. I think I will leave the rest for deficit, revenue, and expenditure. So if we want to increase our expenditure, we raise more revenue. So there's no need to rather increase the deficit. If we raise more revenue, we'll still be within our limits. And I think there's a lot of resources for revenue we are not tapping into. As I was reading the budget, state-owned enterprises made profit of something, some small 3 point something billion, or just a patchy. We have a lot of state-owned enterprises, GNPC and all and they are not giving dividends to government. That is number one. Property rates. We are not just collecting the right amounts. They come, you complain, and they negotiate with you. Those who collect, they negotiate on a bilateral basis, negotiate with you. And I mean, there was one guy who came to my house and said, "Oh, you shouldn't have come to pay in the office. I could have come to collect it." And then I said, "What do you mean?" So you see, we have a lot of this kinds of discretion, people not accounting for monies from the assemblies, and there are a lot of high-value land properties untaxed. I would have thought that land in some prime areas would be taxed. They are not developed. Tax them, they will develop them or sell them. So there are a lot of avenues for revenue mobilization. At night, there are a lot of businesses that operate. Who taxes them? No, yes, we don't tax them. So I think we should rather talk about raising more revenue efficiency, and stay within the 5% limit. On that note, I think I want to thank all of you for coming.